This video demonstrates the dual head alignment process on Mutoh ValueJet printers. Please note that Mutoh strongly recommends the usage of backlit material for this process. Before beginning, we need to first power down the machine so that we can boot it back up into diagnostic mode. Once the printer turns off, we're going to press and hold the up, right, and down arrow keys all at once and push the power button, but continue holding those three keys as the machine boots up until you see check 1, adjust platen come up on the screen. Once we're in diagnostic mode, you're going to use your right arrow key and scroll until you find adjustment. Press your enter key on adjustment and the machine's going to initialize. Give it a second or two to complete this process. Once we're in the adjustment menu, use your right arrow key and scroll until you find head slant. Press your enter key on head slant and then press your enter key again on head slant 1 to get the printout. Here's the head slant 1 printout pattern. The areas that we need to focus on are right here, our head slant rough and fine printout, as well as right here, our front to back rough and fine printout. Before we make any adjustments, let's properly identify print head 1 and head 2 on the carriage, as well as where our head slant levers and our front to back lever is located. Standing at the front of the carriage, you're going to see that head 1 is going to be on the left and head 2 is going to be on the right. Each slant lever is going to be located on the front right corner of each print head plate, and the front to back lever is going to be located on the right hand side of head number 2. Okay, so now that we've properly identified the carriage components, let's take a look at the head slant rough and fine printout. With the slant pattern enlarged, we could see that when printed, the heads are now reversed, with head 2 being on the left and head 1 being on the right. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at our rough pattern for our slant check. With the rough pattern enlarged, we could see that the objective here is to get the H nozzle directly in the center of the two A nozzles. Here are some examples of what is acceptable and what is not, but for best results, it's best to get the H nozzle directly in the center of the two A nozzles. Jumping back to the slant printout pattern, let's go ahead and take a look at the fine printout pattern so that we understand both the rough and fine patterns before we try and make an adjustment. Here's an enlargement of the fine printout pattern. There's a couple things that we need to take a look at in this pattern. If you look in the center of the pattern, you're going to see yellow dots. Those need to line up with the black dots on either side from top to bottom. If you look towards the bottom of the screen, you can get a better understanding of how this is going to look through your loop. Now looking at the cyan and black part of the pattern, we need to make sure that the black and the cyan dots interlace with the black dots that the yellow dots are lining up to. Again, looking towards the bottom of the screen, you can get a better understanding of how this will look through your loop. So now that we understand the rough and fine patterns, let's try adjusting head slant 1. Start out with loosening these two screws right here. Once you have these two screws loosened, then you should be able to adjust your head slant lever. Each print head is equipped with its own separate spring. When making adjustments, it's much easier to move against the spring tension rather than with it. So when you're adjusting your lever, put the lever in the forward position of the cam and work your way back towards the back of the carriage when you're making adjustments. Make sure that after you make adjustments, you retighten the two screws before reprinting the pattern. The process for head number 2 slant is identical to print head number 1. Loosen the two screws on either side of print head number 2, and this will allow us to adjust our head slant lever. Using the same method as print head number 1, put the slant lever in the forward position of the cam and adjust going against the spring tension. Also, like head 1, retighten the two screws on either side of the print head before reprinting the pattern. After we've completed our slant patterns for print heads 1 and 2, we now need to take a look at our front to back patterns. Looking closer at the front to back rough and fine pattern, we need to start off with the rough pattern first. That's going to be this pattern over here to the right. Looking at the enlarged rough pattern here, our objective is to get all three yellow lines directly in the center of all three sets of black lines. Here are some examples of what is okay and what is not, but keep in mind that you always want to go for the yellow line directly in the center of the two black lines. This will get you the best output possible. Going back to the front to back rough and fine printout pattern, let's go ahead and take a look at our fine printout pattern. With the fine pattern enlarged, we are looking to make sure that the lines in all four patterns interlace with each other as shown here. Now that we have an understanding of our front to back rough and fine printout patterns, we can go ahead and make our adjustment. To make the adjustment, we're going to need to focus on printhead number 2. Go ahead and loosen the 3 head plate fixing screws. You do not want to loosen the 2 slant screws located on either side of the printhead for this adjustment. Like our head slant adjustment, we have spring tension for the front to back. Using the same method, we want to make sure that when we're making the adjustment, we go against the spring tension. This will make it much easier when we're adjusting the printout pattern. Place the adjustment lever towards the upper portion of the cam and adjust the lever going downwards against the spring tension to make your adjustment. After you make an adjustment to the front to back lever, make sure that you tighten down the 3 set screws before printing the pattern out again. And repeat this process if further adjustment is needed. Before we begin the uni and bidirectional alignment patterns, we first need to understand Drop Master and why it's important to input the media thickness so that we get the most accurate dot placement. Drop Master allows the machine to compensate for the different thickness between each media. As you can see in the screen capture, if you're using thicker media, the drops are going to land in a different place versus using a thinner media. So inputting the thickness of the material into the machine will allow the printer to compensate for the different thickness between materials and get you much better dot placement and ultimately better print quality. Moving into the uni and bidirectional alignment patterns, we're going to set the machine to type B for the uni and bidirectional printouts. This will make certain adjustments a little easier to perform as well as give us a little bit better view of each pattern. Starting from the main menu of diagnostic mode, use your right arrow key and scroll until you find parameter. Once you find parameter, go ahead and press your enter key. Use your right arrow key once to update and press your enter key again. Use your left arrow key now and scroll until you find uni and bi pattern and press your enter key. Use the down arrow key to change it from type A to type B and update the parameter. Once the parameter has been updated, you can use your cancel key and cancel back out to the main menu of diagnostic mode. From here, you're going to use your left arrow key and scroll until you find adjustment again. Once you find adjustment, go ahead and press your enter key into that option. Use the right arrow key and scroll until you find uni by low. Press enter. The machine will prompt us for the thickness. As you can see, we measured 155 on our backlit material, so I'm going to go ahead and use 160. So we're going to go ahead and scroll up to 160, update the parameter. Once the parameter is updated, we're going to go ahead and press enter on uni by low 1, and we're going to perform the adjust 1 print first. Here is the adjust 1 uni printout pattern in type A. If you're going to use this pattern, you do not need to worry about these 2 lines down here, and your focus will be on 2C and 2F. But since we selected type B, the pattern is going to be a little different. Let's take a look at the difference. The big difference between type A and type B patterns are these box patterns right here. These box patterns make it a little easier to see whether or not your lines are lined up correctly. If your lines are not lined up correctly, you're going to see either a gap on top or a gap on bottom. If your lines are lined up correctly, you should see a nice, solid, filled-in rectangle. So checking to make sure that the dots are lined up vertically is still an important part of this process. So here's the type B adjust 1 uni printout pattern. Since 2F cannot be adjusted, we only need to focus on 2C and making sure that that is lined up properly. With the vertical dot pattern enlarged, you can see that in between these reference points, we need to take this section of vertical dots and line them up to our reference vertical dots. If the line needs to shift to the right, then you're going to want to use your up arrow key to go positive on your control panel. If the line needs to go left, then you're going to want to use your minus key on the control panel to go left. Here are some examples of what is acceptable and what is not, but keep in mind that even though we have a half a dot of tolerance, we still want to aim to get the dots directly centered with each other. This is also a good time to check for lateral displacement. If you're seeing that the lines are lining up at the bottom of the pattern, but not the top, then you need to revert back to your slant check, as that could be out of spec. To make any change to the Adjust 1 printout, press Enter on Adjust 1, then you're going to press the Enter key again on Setup, and then use the up and down arrow keys to adjust the pattern, and repeat this process if necessary. Now that we've completed Adjust 1, we need to move on to Adjust 2. Here is a capture of the Adjust 2 pattern in Type B. The process for the Adjust 2 print is going to be identical to the Adjust 1, with the exception of now we have to adjust each individual channel minus 1C and 2C, as those are fixed. Keep in mind that you have to do the Adjust 1 and Adjust 2 printouts for each individual uni print. After completing the uni patterns, scroll to your bidirectional option and press your Enter key. We need to print the pattern first, so use your right arrow key and press Enter on Print. Here is the bidirectional Print 1 pattern in Type A. If you're going to be using this pattern, you do not need to worry about this pattern down below, but need to focus on these two patterns right here and right here for head 1 and 2. Since we changed our machine to Type B, here is a capture of what the Type B printout will look like. Looking at the bidirectional printout pattern, you're going to have to make adjustments for head 1 and head 2. Each head has 2 points of reference, so you're going to be adjusting 4 total here in this pattern. If we zoom in on one of the patterns, let's take a look at what each one should look like. Looking at the enlarged pattern, we can see that 1C is our point of reference. You're also going to have 1F for head 1, as well as 2C and 2F for head 2. What we're looking for in this pattern is that our vertical dots line up with our vertical reference dots. Looking at the lower part of each pattern, we need to pick out which particular pattern lines up the best. In this particular image, we could see that +2 lines up much better than our reference point at 1C, so we would need to go to the right. Keep in mind that you can go in larger increments of +8 or -8 should your machine need it. Here are some examples of what is okay and what is not, but your goal should always be to line up the dots directly in the center, even though we have a half a dot tolerance. To make the changes to the bidirectional patterns, press your Enter key on the bidirectional option, and then press Enter again on Setup. In here, using your up and down arrow keys, you can make changes to head 1 and head 2. To print out the CCW pattern, press your Enter key on the CCW option, use your right arrow key 1 time to print, and press your Enter key again. Here is the CCW printout pattern in Type A. You don't need to worry about this pattern down here, but we'll need to focus on the pattern directly above it, as we will be adjusting each individual channel for both heads. This is the CCW pattern in Type B. This will be the pattern that you see since we set the machine to print the Type B patterns. With the pattern enlarged, our points of adjustment are going to be at the bottom of each pattern. Taking a closer look at the individual adjustment pattern, our objective is to get the vertical row of dots aligned with our reference row of dots. Using the same method as before, if the row of dots needs to go to the right or positive, then we'll use our up arrow key on the control panel. If the dots need to go to the left or negative, then we'll use our down arrow key. Here are some examples of what is acceptable and what is not, but like before, you always want to get the dots to line up directly down the center. To make adjustments to the CCW pattern, press your Enter key on the CCW option. Press your Enter key again into Setup. In here, using your up and down arrow keys, you can change each individual channel. Once you've made your adjustment, reprint if necessary. After completing this process, be sure to repeat the same adjustments for the uni, bi, and CCW adjustment patterns for the other carriage heights. Also, once you've completed that, be sure to reboot the machine into user mode and check your user head alignments.